Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Free Full Stack course. It's been a while since we've recorded an episode for this course, so let's just reiterate on what we've worked on previously. I'll just quickly bring up Visual Studio Code in here so we can have a look at what we've achieved so far. Let's start our server using Python 3, or just you could say Python as well, manage py run server, which is something that we've done in the previous examples as well. So if you just run your server and then navigate to the correct folder, let's see if I can actually bring up that particular window as well. So I'll just bring it up here. So this is how we left our server. So if you go to localhost at 8000, you can see that we get this particular error simply because we don't have a route set up for this particular URL. However, if you go to /admin, then you can see that we have our admin page in here with some products and product categories and makers that we've populated. So these are our products that we've set up at the moment. You can see we have a OnePlus phone and an iPhone 13 Pro Max in here. And if you go in there, we can see that they're associated with their own makers. They have titles and subtitles and some image URLs as well and a price, but we don't have at the moment a variation product ID. What we are going to do in this particular video is to set up our first APIs. So we're going to go ahead and serve these products and their, for instance, makers and categories. So we have 3 model files and we're going to serve them through APIs. If you open your models.py file in the products product, because it is actually, or a products app, you will see that we have 3 model files. Sorry, 3 models. One is a product category, the other one is a maker, and the third and the last one is an actual product. So what we're going to do in this video is to go ahead and create 3 separate APIs that will serve us all the categories, all the makers, and all the products. Okay, so there's going to be some action involved in serializing these things. All right, but what we're going to do first before we get started with that is to actually change the way that we created our virtual environment. You see, in the previous videos we've worked with Pyenv, and Pyenv has been really great in setting up our Python version and ensuring that we're using the correct Python version. However, Pyenv's virtual environment management is not really as optimal as it should be, and the new versions of Visual Studio Code will actually, but they have already support for creating a virtual environment using venv, which is a module that you can use with Python. So in this video, before we get started creating our APIs, we're going to first change the way that we manage our virtual environment. If you go to the terminal for your application right now, let's just stop this. You will see a little prefix here that says DRF backend course. This is the virtual environment that we created with Pyenv, and we've activated it for this particular folder. Okay, what we're going to do then is to delete and deactivate this virtual environment and use Visual Studio Code to manage our virtual environment. So let's see what Pyenv has here, and I'm going to improvise a little bit in here. So let's say we have virtual envs. Okay, and what we're going to do is to use virtual env delete and delete this particular virtual environment that we're on. So I'm going to say Pyenv virtual env delete, and we're going to say DRF backend course. Okay, and it asks us if we really want to delete it. Yes, and now you can see it has been deactivated, so there is no prefix to this folder at the moment. Okay, so after doing that, we need to go ahead and create a virtual environment basically. So we need to also ensure that we don't have a this particular file in our folder. You can see we have this Python version, which is for our virtual environment. So let's remove that as well. So let's say Python version. Okay. And at the moment, the Python that I'm using for my computer, since I've updated Python actually using Pyenv, and you can do that too. I think it is, I'm not going to guess it. So let's say Python 3 version is 3.10.2, but I believe that I have 3.10.6 as well on my computer. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to actually change the Python version. So I'm going to say Pyenv. I'm going to say for this particular shell, I'm going to use 3.10.6. Okay. And you're more than welcome to actually install 3.10.6. You can say Pyenv. I think there is an install in here. Install, yes. So you can actually install, okay, and you can say pyenv install dash dash list, and you can see the available Python versions that you can install on your computer before going ahead and actually doing the installation. So I had a look in here previously and I saw that, oh, 3.10.6 is available, and I actually installed it on my computer. So now I can go ahead and say for this particular shell, I actually want 3.10.6. So if I now say Python version 3.10.6 is the active version in this current shell. Okay, so having done that, then I can go ahead and create a virtual environment in Visual Studio Code directly. Okay, so I'm just gonna say Command Shift P on Mac or Control Shift P on Windows and Linux, and then we say create environment. Okay, so and it says, okay, do you want to use conda or venv? And we're going to say we're going to create it with venv, okay? And it says, which interpreter do you want to use? And we say, okay, 3.10.6 is actually the version that we want. And I enter that, and you can see it says creating environment. We have selected the following environment, good. So if we close this shell and open a new shell, you can see Visual Studio Code sources your new environment, and now you have a prefix of .venv. And what this does really is that it creates a separate folder here for you, venv, which includes all your dependencies, okay? However, one thing that we forgot to actually do was to freeze our requirements. And this is something that you will learn with time, what freezing requirements is. But if you remember when we got started with creating our backend, we had to install some dependencies such as Django REST Framework, Black, which is our kind of formatter, or formatting provider. We also installed Markdown and Psycop.g2 actually for our database connection. We forgot to freeze those requirements, and freezing requirements in the world of Python means that you have some dependencies and you want to kind of like get their version at this point in time and freeze that and save it inside a file so that anyone else can restore your requirements using that file. And that file usually is called requirements.txt, okay? But I mean, if you've worked with any other modern frameworks, such as like if you're doing Swift UI or UI kit development for iOS, you still are probably using Swift Package Manager or you're using CocoaPods. Those are also like managing your requirements kind of. So you have some sort of a lock file, and using that lock file, SPM, Swift Package Manager or CocoaPods can figure out what versions of what dependencies your project has, okay? And that's the same thing as Python requirements files. And if you're using, for instance, Gradle with Maven for Android development, then you know that as well. You can have npm node package manager, so your packages are locked. So that lock file is kind of like the requirement file. So you can see it is available in pretty much all modern frameworks and languages as well. So even Rust, you can do the same thing. But we forgot to do that, unfortunately, before we erased our Pyenv virtual environment and created a new virtual environment. So now if we try to run our project, I believe that we will get errors. So if we say run server, you can see we will get tons of errors in here because it doesn't know where Django actually is. So what we need to do is to go ahead and install those dependencies. So we say Django REST Framework. We need Black. So Django is to actually get up and running with our server. The Django REST Framework is to get up and running with REST APIs. Black is our formatting provider for our Python code. We need a Markdown because Django REST Framework actually provides some free documentations for your code, and it gives you some like very nice views of your REST APIs, kind of like OpenAPI. So for that, we need Markdown, and we also need Psycop.g2 for our I should have said pip install, and Psycop.g2 for our database. So let's install these. Pip install Django. Right, I can't do, maybe I should have done spaces between them. So let's say pip install Django REST Framework. Then we need Black, Markdown, and Psycop.g2. Let's see if we can install all these at the same time now. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a comma. It shouldn't be a comma in between. It should actually be a space, okay? So after installing these, then we should say run server, and you now see your server running in here without problem. So if you refresh here, then everything's working as expected. So what we did in this step of the video was to simply move away from Pyenv's way of creating virtual environments and instead simply depend on Visual Studio Code's way of creating the virtual environments using venv, which is a Python module, which you can actually manage yourself by hand. You don't have to depend on Visual Studio Code to do that. You can say, I believe if we stop our server in here, I think if we say Python module venv, you can see, oh, the following arguments are recorded. Yes, you need to pretty much, so yeah, you actually executed virtual environment module, and it's asking you to provide it with some information. So we can say -H to get help, and you can see this is how you can manage virtual environments yourself as well by hand. If for instance, you're not using Visual Studio Code as your code editor, if you're using something else, then you can go ahead and directly manage virtual environments using venv by saying Python module venv. Okay, so this way you can actually manage your virtual environment by hand. But since Visual Studio Code already has that built in, we don't have to do anything really. We can just basically add it to our project. And as you saw, it becomes a folder in here, venv, which is sitting here with all your dependencies. Okay, good. That part is done now. What we need to do then is to start working a little bit on our serializers and actually talking a little bit about what serializers are before we get into it, and also routes we need to talk about as well. Okay, so the way Django REST Framework works is that it understands models. Okay, it says, okay, these are some models, they have some fields. However, in order to serve these things to your users, you need to serialize them, because not always do you want to provide your models with all their information to users. And also in many cases, such as this case, actually, in the case of having a product, if we have a look at the maker, you can see that the maker is actually a foreign key to the maker table. However, if you just serve every product to your users the way it is and serialize all the fields and say, okay, we have a title, we have a subtitle and a maker, the way the maker will be then serialized and provided to your users will just be with a foreign key and an integer. So it will just say maker equal 1 or maker equal 2 or whatever ID those makers have in your database. And this is usually not the way your applications want to consume your APIs. So what you need to do is to ensure that using your serializers, that you make your models make sense for your users. So that is the job of a serializer. It takes a model and it like kind of blows it up. It says, oh, it maker is an integer, but in this case, I want to actually resolve maker to a depth of 1 and go in the maker table, as you can see in here, it is in the maker table, or actually, sorry, the maker model in here, and resolve this maker and provide its name to the consumer of this API, which is going to be our Flutter and Rust applications later. So that's the job of serializers. We need to ensure that we're providing that to our users. So what we can do now is to go ahead and start writing our serializers, okay? And we can do that by going in here. So let's see, in our backend, you can see in the products application at the moment, we have models, but we don't have serializers. So let's right click on this products application and we're going to say new file, and let's say serializers.py. Okay, good. We have serializers py, and we need to start basically adding our first serializers in here. So what we need to do is to first import serializers from Django's REST framework. So we're going to say from REST framework import serializers, as you can see in here. And then we're going to start with creating our, let's say, the product category serializer. Okay, so if we go back to our models, you can see the first model is a product category. So let's serialize this and display it to the user. Okay, so we say, and every serializer is actually a class of its own, which is gonna, which needs to kind of extend, or it needs to subclass another serializer that's already provided in here. So if you go into these serializers, you can see you have different serializers in here. Let's see. Let's see if we can find it. Like here's a base serializer, which you probably don't want to use. Let's see what we have in here. Lots of code. That's the meta class. We're not going to talk about that at the moment, but soon. Here, for instance, it's a list serializer. There is some replication of list fields here, but that's probably that's a horrible documentation. But let's see if we can find model serializer, which is what we're gonna use. Let's see, model serializer. Here it is. So this is a serializer that we're gonna use, and this is its documentation. And you can see it says a model serializer is just a regular serializer, except that blah blah, and determining set of serializer fields based on them. Okay, I don't really like the documentation in here because model serializer is actually the core of what we're gonna use in here. So I will try to document it now. So model serializer class inside this serializers, how do you say it, module perhaps, it is gonna provide us with the ability to take a model class, for instance, the product category, and outputting its results into then our APIs. Okay, and use it. And what we usually do with model serializers is that inside it we create a nested class called meta, and that meta class will then provide information to Django REST Framework about how you want to serialize this information and output it to your APIs. Okay, so what in this case, in the product category case, we want to say the class that we want to serialize is product category, and we want to serialize all its fields. Okay, name, icon, URL, description, and parent category. All right, so let's go ahead and see if we can do that right now. So we create a class, we say class product category serializer, okay, and we say serializers.model serializer. And in here, we need to create a meta. As you can see, GitHub Copilot is suggesting actually that we create a meta. And it says, okay, the model, you see, this is a field inside this meta class. So if you actually command click on Mac or control click on it, you go, oops, let's go into the meta class. Meta, let's see if we can get the serializer meta class here. You can see in here that we have, what do we have in here? If you look for the model, so if you say model equal to get model, perhaps, get model fields, we have model here, there, you see. So it is a little bit strange, to be honest with you. I mean, in some other programming languages, it's a lot easier to understand what you actually have to do, but in Python, since it is so open and so dynamic, you kind of need to read the documentations to know what you need, what you can do. All right, and in this case, if you go to Django REST Framework's documentation and read about model serializer, everything is documented very well in there, and you'll understand directly that, oh, I have to create a class in here called meta, and then I need to tell it which kind of object I'm trying to serialize. All right, so we're trying to serialize product category in here. Let's go ahead and first import it. So I'm going to get help from Visual Studio Code and say add this. All right, product category, and then you have this very magic kind of fields argument or property that you can pass to this meta class, and you can tell it that I want to serialize all the fields. And this looks a little bit strange, but after a while of working with Django and Django REST Framework, you'll kind of memorize this. It will be just natural for you. All right, but in the beginning, when you look at it, you'd be like, what is this? But all this is really doing is saying that this serializer works on a class called product category, which comes from our models, all right? And it wants to serialize all its fields. So everything, name, icon, URL, description, and parent category will be outputted to whichever API or view, as we call them, is going to consume the serializer. Okay. Good. So now that we have that, so I know that we haven't created all the serializers, but it'd be really fun if you could go test it out. All right. So in order to do that, we need to create views. So the way it works when you, for instance, try to call an API. So if we say, for instance, localhost 8000, and at the moment, if we go into our URLs for our backend, let's have a look at our routes that are set up at the moment, URLs. You can see the only URLs that are set up are admin/ and auth/. All right. And if we go to admin/, it's this one. And we can also say auth slash, and our server is not running. I just noticed run server. All right, auth slash, and I think we have login. And this is Django REST Framework's login. So these are the only top URLs or routes that we have set up to this point. But what we want really is to be able to go into our local host. And then after that, we want to say slash products. Okay, so we need to have slash products. And then after that, we can say, for instance, in here, we can say slash products. And then we want to say slash, for instance, categories or something like that. Okay, so and this is because we have the categories serializer at the moment, and we want to get that to work. So in order to for all of this to work, really, is first we need to go into the backend URLs and tell it that we actually want to have a path. All right, we want to have a path that goes into our products application, which is not this backend, but this products application, and then we can let the products application then decide what it wants to do with the rest of the URL. So URL management in Django and pretty much in any other backend technology is a little bit strange. I mean, just because you have to like break the URLs down, and I mean it. And like if you're using Express.js or if you're using Nest.js, Django, whatever you're using, even if you're using Rust, for instance, for your backend, you have to think really hard about how URL management and routing actually works. Of course, Nest.js, for instance, tries to break it down into controllers like Express.js also does, but still is a little bit difficult to understand the concept for beginners. But worry not, because I'm going to break it down to you right now. So let's just focus on one bit of information at a time. Our backend here, backend application, is the root of our entire solution. Okay, so when we type localhost 8000, everything after this will come here to this URL's py. All right, and then it will be resolved. Then what we need to do is to say, okay, do we have anything that can resolve these products? Nope, doesn't seem like it. We have auth and admin. So let's go ahead and add a path in here. Okay, so the first thing you do is just say, okay, I want to have a path that says products. All right, how do I connect this backend application to the products application? It's very easy though. What we need to do in here and say we have products slash. All right, so don't forget the slash. Then in here, we need to, right after that, just type include like that and just leave it. All right. Include, what it does is that it takes this products and it says, okay, in here, I want to pass the rest of the information that comes after products, if any, to whatever you specify in here. Okay, so in here, you need to have another URLs file. All right. However, our products application doesn't have URLs py file, you see. It is empty, so it cannot process URLs. So let's remedy that. We right click on it. Actually, we copy this guy, entire URLs py from here. Okay, we copy it, we go into products, we right click on products and we say new file and we say urls.py like that, and I'm just pasting it there. All right, I'm gonna remove this documentation from top of the file because I don't think it really contributes to so much, and I'm gonna go to the urls py in the backend and remove all this from here as well. All right, so those are gone. Now, if you look at the urls py in the products application, we have these all the information that we brought basically from our backend. Since we brought this from our backend URLs, we need to clean it up because it's not going to be applicable for our use case. So I'm going to remove this. And the way you need to think about what you need to write in here is that once you're here, you need to process everything that comes after products slash, because products slash is handled already in your backend. You see products slash, and it includes, or it doesn't include anything at the moment, but it needs to include whatever this guy is doing. So let's actually first take care of that. Okay, What's also important is that we specify a property in here that is called app name. So we say app name is called products, and you need to do this for all of your apps, okay? Because it has something to do with namespacing. It is a little bit more complex to explain it, but I'm not gonna explain it right now because it gets too complex for our use case. Just remember, when you're defining your URLs for any application, in this case products, just specify the application name before your URL patterns and say app name is equal to, well, the name of your application, okay? And I think once we get more and more advanced in Django and Django REST Framework, I'll try to explain this more as well. But right now, you just leave it as it is, okay? Now that you've done this, just leave the URLs pie in the products and go back to URLs pie in your backend and include this URLs pie in here, okay? So what we're gonna do is to go ahead in here and say includes, specify your application name first, products, and then you tell it URLs because that's the name of the file. So this is URLs pie, but don't write URLs.py, okay? Just type URLs, that's it. And since you've specified an application name in here, it's called products, you need to go ahead in here and say the namespace is equal to products, okay? So we'll perhaps talk more about namespaces and app names later, but not for now, okay? Now we have this, let's go into our terminal, and if I press Command S in here, you can see everything restarts without problem. So, however, we haven't defined any URL patterns in here. So if I say in here products / you can see that it says, I tried with everything I could with the admin on auth. Actually, it doesn't understand yet. Products, it seems like it. So simply because this products is empty at the moment. So we need to remedy this. So we need to go ahead and define some views for this guy. All right, but don't worry about it. We're gonna fix that soon. Now that we have our serializers in here in the products application, we need to bring them to life. We need to hand them over to some guy that can process it for the user, for the person who's trying to call our backend and consume an API. And the classes or the objects that take care of that are usually called views. In older versions of Django, like for those of you, Django REST Framework, for those of you who are working with it many years ago, you'll know them as just simple functions, like a function that takes care of a get call, okay? However, in the newer versions of Django REST Framework, there are classes called views and view sets that we can take advantage of in order to consume a serializer and hand the data over to the consumer, who's the user. So one more time, the models are your objects. They're your objects. The user has nothing to do with models, okay? And when I say user, I mean the consumer of your APIs. Serializers take a model and output data that is understandable by a consumer who is a user. However, outputting data is not enough. You need to show the data. And the person or the thing that takes care of showing the data are your views or your view sets. So you have models, serializers, and views. Okay, but at the moment we don't have any views, and that's why our URLs pie is empty and not in the back end, but URLs pie in products is empty because we don't have any endpoint. And this is what backend developers call an endpoint. It's kind of like when you make a get call, it needs to go to a route. We don't have any of those routes in here in the products application. Okay, so in here in products application, right click on it and say new file, and we're going to create a new file called views.py. Oops, it seems like we already have views.py. Let's go in here. Oh, it's empty. So we have the views.py, but it was empty. So let's go and create our first view in here. Okay, so the first view is going to serve the purpose of providing information about the serializer. Not about the serializer, it's actually going to take the serializer and give it to whoever is trying to consume it. Okay, so let's go in this views and create our first view. So we're going to say class product category, because this is a serializer, product category serializer. We're going to create a product category and we're going to call it list view. Okay, excuse me, because that is what it's going to do. It's going to actually provide all the product categories inside a list. All right, and that is a JSON list. I mean, the list is going to look like this. All right, it's going to be like the first category is going to be like this, and the second category is going to be looking like that. So this is a list. Therefore, this has to be a list view. And I don't mean its name. its name is something that we set. However, it needs to extend or subclass a specific list view that Django REST framework gives us. So let's go ahead and import that. We say from REST framework dot generics import list view, list API view, or import list API view. Okay, so after importing this, now you can go ahead and say that we want to extend that. All right. Now, the way these work is that you need to actually give them usually two properties. You need to tell it the serializer, this list view wants to know, okay, which serializer do I have to use in order to know what I need to output to the user? So say serializer class, you can see Visual Studio Code is helping us. And in here, we need to say product category serializer. So let's import that. Okay, so that's the first hurdle gone. And then this guy knows, okay, how, so this serializer knows that given a product category, you see what it has to serialize. However, how does this serializer know what to retrieve from the database? You'd be right to actually guess that this is not the job of the serializer. The serializer only takes a model object, in this case, an object of type product category, and it will be able to output its data to serialize its fields basically into human understandable, human readable information. So this guy just says, okay, this is the serializer class I want to use in order to take a product category and output its fields. However, it is the job of the list view or the job of the view to actually retrieve the objects that have to be serialized. And that's this property, query set, okay? So using the query set, we can say, okay, what objects do we want to actually retrieve? In this endpoint or in this view, product category list view, we want to retrieve every product category. So let's say product category.objects.all, and we need to import product category as well. Okay, great stuff. So now we have the product category list view. It would be really cool if we could go ahead and turn it into an API. Okay, so this is an endpoint. So we can easily turn it into an API by going into our URLs. And in here, just think how we want this to actually work. So as we looked at it, we have products in here now resolved. We need to go into / and say perhaps categories. Okay, categories like this. So if anyone types this, we want to output all our product categories to the user. That's it. So let's go in here and say we have a path. All right. And this path is called categories, because you see the product / is already handled in the backend URLs. So everything after it is something we need to handle in here. So we say, okay, if someone gives us categories, then we want to output this views information. Okay, so let's go ahead in here and we say we want to import our views. So we say from .views import product category list view like this. And then we say that we want to take the product category list view, we turn it to a view, as you can see in here. So this is just something magical that you have to learn how Django REST Framework works. It takes a list view and turns it into a view. Okay, you can't just output it like this. And then we give it a name. Okay, so we say name is categories list. All right, so let's have a look at our terminal as well. And then I'm gonna press Command S or Control S on Linux and Windows. After doing that, let's refresh. And all of a sudden, you see that we got our first ever API. Isn't it cool? You can see that we have our API now served, and you can see the background. You see the background has some images in here, and this is coming from Markdown, I believe, because all of this is actually formatted kind of with Markdown as well. So you can see we got our first API. And if you go in here and change this, like say categories with a Z, and you save and you refresh, you see your endpoint is broken. So you have to go up here and say categories like that. Okay, so that is now working as expected. So congratulations, you got your first API, or we got our first API working. So I'm going to change it back to categories and go in here and say categories. However, one thing that you may have noticed is that in these cases, like you can see that the first category has an ID of 1 and it has a parent category of null. However, the second category, which is called cell phones, I believe it has a parent category. Actually, I don't believe, I know. It has a parent category of ID 1, which goes in here. Okay. So it would have been really cool if we didn't have to make this connection ourselves, because at this point, at this time, I have to go and say, oh, 1. What does that mean? Oh, It means a category that has an ID of one. So if you had tons of categories in here, it would be really difficult for you or for the consumer of your API to keep track of, oh, what does this even mean? Like, I wish we could just in here expand this parent category right here and say the parent category is actually this object. All right, so it is very, very easy to do that with serializers. What you need to do is to go ahead and serializer this guy who's taking care of outputting this, or not outputting this, but serializing an object. What it could do is to expand every nested object to a certain depth. So in here, there is one depth in here, you see, because it goes into another object with a specific ID. So what we could do is to expand it to a depth of 1. But we don't want to expand it to a depth of 2, because what would happen in that case is that if in here we said depth of 1, then this object will come all the way right here. But if it's a depth of 2, then it would also expand whatever parent category that object has to another parent category. It will be just so heavy, okay? So don't worry if this doesn't make sense. Let's just go ahead into serializers, and in here, let's just say depth, which is a property, is 1, okay? So you can see in our meta class, we said depth is 1. I'm gonna save this, and then let's go in here and refresh. So keep track of this guy, ID 2. You see its parent category at the moment says 1. The only thing we changed is that we said depth equal to 1, and refresh. Now, all of a sudden, you see this guy is now displaying the parent category, but it has basically extracted it to a depth of 1. And that's that depth of 1. All right. If this guy had its own parent category, then using depth 1 would not resolve this parent category to its own object in here. It will just leave it. But if you said depth of 2, if this guy had a parent category, then that would also be resolved. So I hope you understand what depth actually does. Okay, so just leave it at depth of 1 and just refresh. You can see that it is working for parent categories that have null. Nothing is expanded. However, for those categories that have a parent category, those will also be expanded to a depth of 1. All right. So congratulations, our first API, which is a get API, as you can see in here. And you can also see that you can play with these things a little bit. So, all right. So don't be shy. Just go ahead and have a look. And also the way we've developed our application at the moment is that our APIs are available for anyone making a request, even if they're not logged in. So I believe so. So if you copy this and bring up a new anonymous user in here, you can see we are not logged in, then we can basically call this API as well. So we haven't taken care of authentication. All right, we're going to take care of that in later videos, but for now, let's just focus a little bit on the core functionalities inside Django and Django REST Framework. All right, very, very good. So that was the process of creating a serializer and then a view for it and then handing it to URLs. So now we have this products/categories, but we actually can't serve some other models. So except for product category, we also have the makers here. So let's go and create a serializer for maker. So we import maker in here as well. Okay. And we say class maker serializer. GitHub Copilot is trying to help me, so I'm just going to let it. You can see maker is being serialized. As you'd expected, we don't have to specify any depth, because if you remember from our makers, they just have a name. They don't have a foreign key to any other object. So there's no need to actually specify a depth in here. There is nothing to go into depth about, all right? And we're serializing all the fields. So let's go into views and create actually a list view for the maker as well. So let's import that guy. So we say from products.models import maker, okay? And also let's import a serializer. So we say maker serializer. And we're going to take this guy and copy and just paste it in here. So let's say maker list view, okay? And in the maker list view, it is a list view, list API view. Its serializer class needs to be the maker serializer. And the query set is going to go into the maker objects and get all those objects. All right. Now that we have this guy, let's also, and please also ensure that you're always saving these files, because imagine if I made a change in here, I see this little plop in here, you see this circle, And then without saving it, if you just go to your backend in Safari, for instance, or in Chrome or Firefox, and do a refresh or something, your changes won't be displayed because you haven't saved your file. So ensure that none of these plops are displayed. Like you see in here, I can see this file is not saved because it has this little circle next to it. Okay, now I save it and save this one as well. Now we have the list view for this maker, but our job is not done. We need to actually route the API call for this maker list view into its list class. All right, so we have no URL for it at the moment. So let's go in here and think about how we want it to work. So if we say we want to retrieve all the makers in the system, it would be really good if you could just say products/makers. All right, at the moment that API doesn't work because we don't have a route for it. We have only route for categories. So let's go ahead and define a makers route for this. Okay, path makers. Okay, then we need to take the makers list view like this, and then we go and do exact same thing as we did up there. Okay, and don't forget the comma in between these. So makers list. Actually, yeah, this would be fine. Makers or maker list. Here we said categories, even though this is category, and here we have maker. It would make sense to say makers list. All right. Now that we have that, we can look at our terminal and you can see everything's working as expected. So no immediate errors in the terminal. And if we refresh, there we go. Our second API is in place. You can see we have our maker with ID of 1, which is Apple, and maker with ID of 2, which is OnePlus. So again, congratulations. Now you got your second API. You can see how easy it is. As soon as you define your models, you can go with serializers, views, and then URLs, and you're pretty much done. Okay. Excuse me. So now that that is done, we have the maker API. Let's go and serialize our products. Okay, and that's also going to be easy. So let's go into our serializers and we say we have a product serializer, and let's import it. Actually, they import the model because we're going to serialize a product. So we say class product serializer, which is coming from serializers dot model serializer. Okay, and let's GitHub Copilot and fix this for me. So it says a meta class product is the model, and we want to take all the fields and output them. All right, and there's a lot that you can play with when you're working with model serializer. We don't talk about right now, at least, all these properties of a model serializer. You can, for instance, tell it to exclude certain fields. So you say include all the fields by default, but take away like specific two fields. Okay, I think there's an exclude or something. If you go to model serializers, exclude here. Okay, so we can play with all of those, and we need to read the documentations for how model serializer actually works on the hood for specific product. Like if we go in here, if you look at products, we actually want to output all the fields. There's nothing hidden in here. Okay, so we just say output all the fields. Then we go for views, and we need to create a list view for products as well. Okay, because what we want to do is to say products, and if someone says just products slash, we want to output all the products. So this is our get API call for products. Okay, so let's go ahead and say we create a view. We say class product list view. All right, and it says we need the product serializer, so let's import that. And we say we also need product as an object in here. So let's see, from products models import product. Good. So our imports look like this. All right, and now we have the product list view. So now that we have the list view, we have to kind of define the API. And as I said, we want the products slash endpoint to route to this guy. How do we do that? If you remember from our urls.py from backend, products slash is already resolved by this guy, the urls.py on the backend application. So we don't have anything after it. We literally want this guy to go into our product list view. So you may be thinking, oh, then I have to go into URLs in the backend to solve that. Well, no, you should never do that. The backend application should know pretty much nothing about the products application. That's how you should create modules in your, I mean, modules not in Django form, but I mean like applications. That's the job of applications. They need to take care of their own URLs. Okay, so think of it this way: the URLs pie on the backend application has taken care of routing everything that leads to product slash to you, which is this one. So what happens if you just say, well, okay, you routed product slash, but I want to handle nothing after that. Okay, well, you can actually do that. You can say, after the slash of product slash, I don't want to have to handle anything. So this particular route just takes care of product slash, all right? Because there's nothing after it. And this is how you do it, okay? So let's go ahead in here and we say, after this, we have the product list view. So in here, we just say nothing basically after product slash, and then we say products, product list, or did we not call it product list view, or we call it products list view, right? Or we call it product list view or products. Let's go ahead to our views and change this to products list view, okay? Products list view. And then in here, we change this as well to products list view. And let's say products list view, and then we say as view, as you can see in here, okay? And we say the name is products dash list. And these names actually don't matter so much. It's just for our own usage later, okay? But the user really doesn't see this, okay? So let's save this file and have a look at our terminal. You can see everything worked as expected, or at least it looks like it. Then what we can do in here is just to refresh, and boom, all of a sudden you can see all your products displayed in here. Okay, really good, right? You can see the ID, the title, subtitle, all the images, the price, currency. However, one thing that is not so good about this is that, as you can see, this object has a nested object of a maker. So it's connected to a maker. However, it doesn't really expand the maker. But that shouldn't really be a problem for us because we know exactly how to handle that. We can go into our serializer in here for a product, and we can go and say depth is equal to 1. So we're resolving any object up to depth of 1, all right, which is this maker. It's just one object. We don't want to expand anything under that maker, okay? So let's say depth equal to 1 and save this file. Server is restarted, so I'm just going to refresh this, and all of a sudden you can see your makers are expanded, okay? So all as well, of course, this one is also expanded for us, okay? So this is actually pretty much what we had to do in this video. So we got 3 API endpoints. We got product slash categories, okay, like this. And also we have product slash makers, I believe, okay. So 3 API calls, they're all 3 get API calls. And believe it or not, you can actually go ahead with an API factory or something such as Postman. You can go ahead and call these APIs with no headers or anything really. The only header thing that you have to provide is just content type really, okay, for application/JSON. And you can call these API with Postman and see, for instance, the results in there as well. They're not just pretty looking like this. You can call them, like you can literally go ahead and create an application right now in Flutter or Rust or whatever you want to in Swift or Kotlin and call these APIs just like you would call any other API, and they would just work. So this is just a prettification of those APIs. It's just a nice view that Django REST Framework provides us, okay? And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I have Postman right now application, so it seems like I have Postman. So should we improvise a little bit and see if we can actually call these APIs? Let's see. Let's see if I can bring up Postman in here. And I'm very sorry that my Postman, at least, is very white, unfortunately. So I'm going to go in here, bring it up on the screen and see if we can create a new API call in here. So let's just say it is a get call, okay? And let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger. And we're going to say the request URL is actually localhost 3000. I believe it's 8,000, so 3,000 is for Nest.js. So 8,000. And then in here, we can say slash products and then slash. And then headers, let's see what is being passed in here. It seems like there are some default headers that we can't see at the moment. And there are some presets, manage presets. Oh, there is nothing. Okay. So for the key in here, let's pass this content type application slash JSON. Okay. So we say content type, oops, content type. And then we say the value is application JSON, and we can just send this API now. There we go. We got our results. So very cool, right? So you can see we're actually getting JSON back from our APIs, and we can say products slash categories. And you can see our categories being printed here as well. Okay, and you see the depth thing is working in here as well. So it's not just some magic that's working only in the admin console. Sorry, not in the admin console, but in the outputted Django REST frameworks view. And also we had makers. So we can say makers, send, and you can see these makers outputted as well. So congratulations, we're done with this video pretty much. What we need to do is just to perhaps stop our server and let's just commit this code. So we say git log. We had step 3 before. So let's say git add all, git commit, step 4, and we say add get APIs for products slash products slash categories and products slash makers. Okay, and then we can push these changes to our remote. Congratulations again, we're done creating our 3 endpoints. So it would be really good now if you could just play a little bit with these model serializers as a homework. So maybe not homework, but as something that you just do after this video to get more comfortable with serializers. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to talking with you in the next video.